Let's just say the quiet part out loud. Everything is cked, not in a dramatic end-of-the-world way, not with explosions and zombies, but in a slower, more unsettling way, where everything technically works, yet nothing feels right. We're richer than ever, safer than ever, more connected than ever. And somehow, we're also more anxious, more depressed, more angry, and more confused than any generation before us. That's not bad luck. That's a broken promise. We were told that progress would make us happy, that comfort would calm us down, that freedom would give us meaning. And instead, we got endless choice, constant pressure, and a low-grade sense that we're failing at a game no one fully explained. People aren't miserable because life is hard. They're miserable because life is confusing, because suffering didn't disappear. It just lost its instructions. Like, our ancestors suffered to survive. We suffer to feel relevant, to feel successful, to feel like we matter. And when those things don't work, we assume something is wrong with us. But what if nothing is wrong with you? We're drowning in information, motivation, and self-help advice, and somehow we feel less motivated than ever. We're told to be positive, rational, successful, passionate, disciplined, grateful, and fulfilled simultaneously. That's not self-improvement. That's emotional overload. We worship logic but live by emotion. We chase happiness but avoid responsibility. We want freedom but panic when nothing tells us what to do. And here's the part nobody wants to hear. Comfort didn't save us. It softened us. Success didn't fulfill us. It exposed us. Hope didn't guide us. It confused us, because hope without responsibility turns into entitlement, and entitlement turns into resentment, and resentment quietly ruins lives. Money doesn't fix this. Positivity doesn't fix this. Motivation doesn't fix this. Only meaning does, and meaning doesn't come from feeling good. It comes from choosing what's worth suffering for, on purpose. This isn't a speech about fixing the world. It's about fixing your relationship with it, because the world may stay broken, but you don't have to be. And once you understand that, really understand it, everything changes. Not because life gets easier, but because it finally starts to make sense. Let's start with the obvious thing everyone pretends not to notice. Everything feels broken, not a kind of messy, not a temporarily chaotic. Broken. Deeply, structurally. The kind of broken where things still technically function, but nobody trusts them anymore. Institutions exist but don't inspire confidence. Information is everywhere but meaning is nowhere. Comfort is abundant, yet anxiety is off the charts. And the weirdest part? By every measurable standard, this should be the best time to be alive. We live longer. We're safer. We're richer. We have more choices, more technology, more convenience than any generation in human history. And yet, people are more depressed, more angry, more confused, and more hopeless than ever. That contradiction should bother you. Because when progress increases and despair increases alongside it, the problem isn't external conditions. The problem is internal expectations. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to hear. Modern misery isn't caused by suffering. It's caused by confused hope. We were promised something that reality cannot deliver. We were promised that if society advanced far enough, if technology improved enough, if comfort increased enough, if freedom expanded enough, then happiness would naturally follow. That life would become smoother, safer, easier. That problems would gradually disappear. That promise was bullshit. Life doesn't stop being painful just because it becomes convenient. It just finds new ways to hurt you, quieter ways, subtler ways, more psychological ways. Our ancestors worried about starvation and war. We worry about meaning, relevance, and whether our lives actually matter. Same stress response, different costume. And here's where things really fall apart. Humans are terrible at handling abstract problems. We can fight a predator. We can survive a famine, but put us in a world where suffering is invisible, ambiguous, and self-inflicted, we spiral. Because when pain doesn't have a clear enemy, we turn on ourselves. We start asking the wrong questions. What's wrong with me? Why am I not happy yet? Oh, why does everyone else seem to be doing better? That internalized failure becomes toxic. And modern culture pours gasoline on it. We're surrounded by messaging that says, you can be anything. You can have everything. You just need the right mindset, the right habits, the right hustle. Which sounds empowering until it quietly implies that if you're struggling, it's because you chose wrong. This is how hope mutates into pressure. Hope used to be about survival. Now it's about fulfillment. and fulfillment has become mandatory. Optional happiness has turned into enforced happiness. And enforced happiness is psychological torture, because when happiness becomes an expectation rather than a byproduct, every bad day feels like a personal failure. Every struggle feels unnecessary. Every discomfort feels unjust. But discomfort isn't a bug in the system, it is the system. Here's something no one puts on a motivational poster. Humans don't need constant positivity to function. They need meaning. And meaning comes from choosing what's worth suffering for. You don't eliminate pain. You decide which pain matters. The real crisis of our time isn't that everything is falling apart. It's that we no longer agree on what's worth holding together. Look at money for a second, because finances are where this confusion becomes obvious. People chase financial freedom like it's an escape hatch. If I just make enough money, I'll be free. I won't stress. I won't worry. I won't feel trapped. But money doesn't remove anxiety, it just upgrades it. You go from worrying about survival to worrying about status, from worrying about bills to worrying about relevance. From worrying about stability to worrying about meaning. Money solves money problems. It does not solve existential ones. And yet, we keep selling the fantasy that comfort equals fulfillment, that ease equals peace, that fewer problems equal a better life. But a problem-free life is not a meaningful life. It's a stagnant one. The happiest people aren't the ones with the fewest problems. They're the ones who have problems they willingly accept. Problems aligned with their values, problems they'd choose again if given the option. This is where everything went sideways. We outsourced meaning to systems that were never designed to provide it. Careers, algorithms, social media, economic growth, political ideology. We expected them to tell us who we are and why we matter. They can't. And when they fail, we don't question the expectation. We blame ourselves. This is why people feel simultaneously privileged and miserable. Guilty for struggling, ashamed for feeling empty, confused about why success doesn't feel like success. It's not because you're broken. It's because the promise was wrong. Hope, as it's currently sold, is passive. It says things will get better. Real hope is active. It says I will decide what's worth caring about, even if things don't get better. That difference changes everything. Passive hope waits. Active hope chooses. Passive hope depends on outcomes. Active hope depends on values. This is why chasing happiness directly fails. Happiness is not a destination. It's a side effect of engagement with something meaningful enough to tolerate suffering. And suffering is not optional. It's the entrance fee. Here's a brutal but liberating realization. Life doesn't owe you happiness. It owes you opportunities to choose what matters. Once you accept that, the pressure lifts. You stop demanding that life feel good all the time. You stop interpreting discomfort as failure. You stop chasing illusions of permanent satisfaction. And ironically, that's when life starts working again. This doesn't mean giving up. It means growing up. It means realizing that despair doesn't mean the world is ending. It means your expectations are misaligned, that your internal compass is pointing toward comfort instead of meaning. The world feels fucked not because it's uniquely terrible, but because we were taught to expect it not to be. And expectations shape perception. If you expect life to be easy, every obstacle feels like injustice. If you expect life to be meaningful, obstacles feel like the price of admission. That shift from entitlement to engagement is the foundation of everything that follows. In the next part, we'll talk about why logic alone can't save us, why our emotions run the show whether we admit it or not, and why the modern obsession with being rational has quietly made us more miserable, not less. Because fixing a broken world starts with understanding how the human mind actually works, not how we wish it did. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that humans are rational creatures who occasionally have emotions. That idea sounds flattering. It makes us feel sophisticated. In control. It's also completely wrong. Humans are emotional creatures who occasionally use logic to justify whatever they already feel. Once you see this, a lot of modern chaos suddenly makes sense. We like to believe that if we just had better information, better data, better arguments, everything would calm down. Politics would be saner. Social media would be healthier. People would stop making self-destructive choices. But information has never been the problem. We are drowning in information. What we lack is emotional coherence. Your brain didn't evolve to discover truth. It evolved to keep you alive. And survival doesn't require accuracy. It requires confidence, speed, belonging. So when emotions and facts collide, emotions win every time. This is why people will defend beliefs that make them miserable. This is why logic fails to change minds. This is why entire societies can march confidently in the wrong direction while feeling morally superior the whole way. We don't believe things because they're true. We believe things because they feel right, and feelings don't care about evidence. Modern culture made this worse by pretending the opposite. We told people, be rational, be logical, think critically. Meanwhile, every system we interact with, media, advertising, politics, technology, is engineered to manipulate emotion. Outrage gets clicks. Fear spreads faster than nuance. Validation feels better than accuracy. So we end up with a society that worships reason in theory and emotion in practice. And the disconnect between the two is tearing people apart internally. Here's the paradox. The more we deny our emotional nature, the more controlled by emotion we become. People who think they're purely logical are often the most irrational because they don't question the emotional engine driving their decisions. This matters because hope, despair, motivation, meaning, all of it lives in the emotional brain. You don't decide to care about something logically. You feel it first, then rationalize it later. That's why telling people everything is actually fine doesn't work. It ignores the emotional reality they're experiencing. And emotional reality is reality, whether you like it or not. Now let's talk about hope, because this is where things get messy. Hope used to be simple. Hope meant survival. Food tomorrow, safety tonight, a future that wasn't guaranteed. Today, hope has been inflated into a lifestyle expectation. We don't just hope to survive. We hope to be fulfilled, validated, admired, and constantly satisfied. That's a lot of pressure for one emotion to carry. When hope is tied to outcomes you can't control, economic growth, political stability, global peace, personal success, it becomes fragile. And fragile hope shatters easily. That's why people swing between blind optimism and total nihilism. Either everything will work out or nothing matters. Both are emotional coping mechanisms, not truth. Blind optimism avoids pain. Nihilism numbs it, neither leads to meaning. This is also why motivation feels broken for so many people. They're waiting to feel motivated before acting. But motivation isn't a cause, it's a consequence. You don't act because you're motivated. You're motivated because you act on something meaningful. Meaning creates motivation. Not the other way around. This applies directly to work, money, and success. People chase financial freedom because they think it will make them feel secure, confident, and purposeful. But money without values just amplifies emotional chaos. You don't become calm because you're wealthy. You become wealthy faster when you're emotionally regulated and value-driven. Financial discipline is emotional discipline. People don't blow money because they're bad at math. They blow money because they're chasing feelings, status, relief, validation, distraction. This is why financial freedom is less about income and more about control over impulses. Less about how much you earn and more about what you're willing to say no to. Hope based on consumption is fragile. Hope based on values is durable. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Despair is often a form of moral laziness. It feels deep, but it's passive. It absolves responsibility. If everything is pointless, then nothing is required of you. That's emotionally convenient. But convenience is rarely healthy. Real hope doesn't deny reality. It confronts it and still chooses engagement. It says that this is flawed, painful, uncertain, and I'm in anyway. That's not optimism. That's commitment. And commitment doesn't come from logic. It comes from values. Values are emotional commitments you're willing to suffer for. They give pain a direction. Without values, suffering feels meaningless. With values, suffering feels purposeful. This is why modern life feels exhausting even when it's comfortable. We removed obvious suffering but failed to replace it with chosen struggle. The emotional brain panics in a vacuum. It needs something to care about, something to sacrifice for, something to anchor identity. When it doesn't get that, it invents problems. It obsesses. It spirals. This is not weakness. It's biology. You are wired to struggle. The question is whether you choose the struggle or let it choose you. In the next part, we'll talk about responsibility. Not the fake shame-based version, but the kind that gives people their lives back. Why meaning doesn't come from fixing the world, but from taking ownership of the small, boring, unglamorous parts of your own life. Because that's where real power actually lives. Responsibility has a branding problem. Most people hear the word and immediately think of blame, obligation, guilt, or being trapped in a life they didn't choose. Responsibility sounds like something heavy people dump on you when things go wrong. That reaction makes sense because we've been taught responsibility as punishment instead of power. But here's the flip most people miss. Responsibility isn't about fault. It's about control. You don't take responsibility because you caused the problem. You take responsibility because you're the only one who can do anything about it. And that distinction changes everything. Modern culture is obsessed with identifying causes. Who's to blame? What system failed? Which generation screwed things up? That can be intellectually interesting, but emotionally, it's a dead end. Because knowing whose fault it is doesn't make your life work any better. Responsibility does. This is where people get stuck in outrage cycles. They see real problems, economic inequality, mental health crises, broken institutions, and instead of asking, what can I meaningfully influence? They ask, who should I be angry at? Anger feels productive. It isn't. Anger without agency turns into resentment, and resentment is just despair pretending to be moral. Here's the hard truth. You don't need the world to be fair for your life to be meaningful. You need ownership over what you choose to care about. That's not surrender. That's strategy. This applies to personal suffering too. People wait for circumstances to improve before taking action. They wait to feel confident, inspired, healed, or validated. But confidence doesn't precede action. It follows it. Action is the cure for emotional paralysis, and not heroic action. Boring action, repetitive action, the kind no one applauds. Responsibility is mundane. That's why it works. It's choosing to manage your money even when no one taught you how. It's choosing to maintain your body even when motivation is inconsistent. It's choosing to set boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. It's choosing values even when outcomes aren't guaranteed. None of that feels exciting. All of it compounds. This is where financial freedom actually lives, not in passive income fantasies, but in the ability to absorb uncertainty without panicking. People who are financially stable aren't immune to stress. They're resilient to it. They planned for volatility. They accepted delayed gratification. They took responsibility for future problems before they arrived. That same mindset applies everywhere. Responsibility is future-oriented compassion for yourself. And here's the part that really messes with people. Responsibility gives meaning before it gives happiness. Happiness is unreliable. Meaning is durable. You can feel miserable and still know your life makes sense. You can feel stressed and still feel aligned. That's not failure. That's adulthood. When people say they want purpose, what they usually mean is they want a life where suffering feels justified, where pain isn't random, where effort isn't wasted. Responsibility provides that structure. This is also why victimhood is so seductive. Victimhood removes responsibility while preserving moral superiority. You get to be angry without having to act. You get to be righteous without being effective. But victimhood traps you in reaction mode. Responsibility puts you in authorship, and authorship is where freedom lives. Freedom isn't the absence of constraints you accept. You are constraints you accept. You are constrained by time, biology, economics, and reality. You don't get to escape that. What you get to choose is how you respond. Most people don't want freedom. They want comfort without consequence, and that doesn't exist. Every meaningful life is built on chosen limitation. You choose what to commit to. You choose what to sacrifice. You choose what pain is worth it. That's not pessimistic, it's grounding. Once you accept that life is hard by default, you stop being shocked by difficulty. You stop interpreting struggle as evidence that something is wrong. You start asking better questions. Not why is this happening to me, but what is this asking of me? That shift changes behavior. People who take responsibility stop outsourcing their self-worth to outcomes. They stop waiting for validation. They stop needing the world to agree with them. They act because action aligns with who they choose to be. And here's the paradox. Responsibility feels heavy at first, then lighter over time. Avoidance feels light at first, then crushing. You pay now or you pay later. Responsibility is the cheaper option. In the next part, we'll talk about values, how to choose them, why most people get them wrong, and why chasing comfort and success without values is the fastest way to feel empty even when things work. Because responsibility without values becomes control. And control without meaning becomes just another cage. If responsibility is about control, then values are about direction. And most people are terrible at choosing them, not because they don't care, but because they confuse values with goals, or worse, with aesthetics. They say they value success, happiness, confidence, freedom. But those aren't values. Those are outcomes. They're things you get when your values are aligned, not things you live by. A value is something you're willing to feel bad for. That's the test. If a value only feels good, it's not a value. It's a preference. Honesty is a value because it sometimes costs you. Discipline is a value because it hurts in the moment. Loyalty is a value because it limits your options. Responsibility is a value because it removes excuses. Comfort is not a value. It's a drug. And our culture is deeply addicted to it. We've optimized everything to reduce friction, one-click purchases, on-demand entertainment, instant validation, infinite distraction, which sounds amazing until you realize friction is how values are formed. When everything is easy, nothing feels meaningful. Why? This is why so many people feel empty even when life is working. The job is fine, the money is okay, the relationship looks good on paper, and yet something feels off. That off feeling is value starvation. You can't feel fulfilled if nothing costs you. And here's where money comes back into the conversation in a way most people don't like. Money amplifies values. It doesn't create them. If you value status, money turns you into a slave to comparison. If you value comfort, money makes you fragile. If you value meaning, money becomes a tool instead of a scorecard. This is why financial freedom is misunderstood. It's not about escaping responsibility. It's about choosing better ones. Most people want money to remove discomfort, but removing discomfort removes growth. And removing growth removes meaning. So people get rich and feel worse not because money failed, but because they used it to avoid the very struggles that gave life structure. A meaningful life is not one with fewer problems. It's one with better problems. Problems aligned with your values. This is why values must be chosen consciously. If you don't choose them, culture will choose them for you. Algorithms will choose them. Peer pressure will choose them. Fear will choose them. And fear chooses poorly. Fear chooses short-term relief over long-term coherence. It chooses approval over integrity. It chooses safety over purpose. Values do the opposite. Values narrow your focus. They say no to a lot so yes can matter. And yes, that makes life harder in some ways. You'll disappoint people. You'll miss out. You'll feel uncertainty. But uncertainty is the price of having a spine. Here's something people don't hear enough. Anxiety is often a sign that you're avoiding a value-based decision. You're stuck because you want incompatible things. Comfort and meaning, freedom and certainty, growth and safety. You don't get all of them. Values force trade-offs, and trade-offs create clarity. This is why people who live by values appear calmer even when their lives are objectively harder. They know why they're suffering, and suffering with context is tolerable. Suffering without context is hell. Values also protect you from false hope. They keep you grounded when outcomes don't pan out, when things fail, when plans collapse. If your identity is tied to results, failure destroys you. If your identity is tied to values, failure informs you. That's resilience. And resilience is worth more than optimism. It emerges when your daily behavior matches what you claim to care about, when your calendar reflects your values, when your spending reflects your priorities, when your sacrifices make sense to you, even if they don't to anyone else. That kind of life doesn't look flashy online, but it works. And working beats impressive. In the final part, we'll pull this all together. Hope, emotion, responsibility, values, success, and talk about what it actually means to live well in a world that may never fully make sense. Not with blind optimism, not with despair, but with grounded, durable hope. The kind that doesn't collapse the moment things go wrong. At some point, you stop asking whether the world is broken and start asking a better question. What kind of person still functions when it is? Because here's the reality no one can escape. Things may not get better in any clean, satisfying way. Systems will wobble, certainties will erode, plans will fail. That doesn't mean life is pointless. It means life is asking for a different kind of strength, not optimism, not cynicism, competence. Competence is deeply underrated. It's quiet. It doesn't trend, but it's what keeps people standing when narratives collapse. A competent person knows how to regulate themselves emotionally. They know what they value. They know what they can control and what they can't. They don't need the world to make sense before they act. They act anyway. This is where hope gets redefined one last time. Not as a belief that everything will turn out fine, but as a commitment to engage regardless of outcome. Hope without responsibility is fantasy. Responsibility without hope is burnout. Put them together and you get something rare: endurance. Endurance is the ability to keep choosing values when the reward isn't obvious, to keep acting with integrity when it would be easier to numb out or give up, to keep investing in long-term stability when chaos feels more entertaining. This is where financial freedom circles back, not as wealth worship, but as risk management. A stable life isn't built by maximizing pleasure. It's built by minimizing catastrophe. You don't need to win big. You need to avoid losing stupidly. That means living below your means. It means building buffers. It means choosing sustainability over ego. And emotionally, it means the same thing. You don't need constant happiness. You need psychological solvency. Enough meaning to absorb disappointment without collapsing. People who last are not the most excited. They're the most aligned. When you don't need motivation because your actions already make sense. That's peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the absence of internal contradiction. And here's the thing most people don't realize until late in life. Meaning isn't something you achieve, it's something you practice. You practice it every time you tell the truth when lying would be easier. Every time you delay gratification instead of feeding an impulse. Every time you choose responsibility over resentment. None of that looks heroic. All of it works. This is also how you become someone others can rely on. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're stable under pressure. You don't panic. You don't overreact. You don't outsource your values to the mood of the moment. In a world addicted to outrage and fantasy, that kind of person is rare and valuable. So no, everything may not suddenly become okay. The world may remain messy, unfair, and confusing. That's not a failure. That's the condition. The question was never whether the world would make sense. The question was whether you would, and that's something you actually get to choose. Not once, but daily.